This is the Spokane Soccer Show, and I am your host, Benji Wade. On today's show, it's a brand new season for Velocity FC as they have added 7 new players to the team. Who are these players? What can we expect of them? Joining me to serve up only the best vibes about all things soccer in the fine city of Spokane. I can't believe this is happening. It is my special guest, John Morrissey, a.k.a. Mr. USL Tactics himself. Welcome to the show, John.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
John is a contributing writer to the online soccer blog called Backheeled, which you can find at backheeled.com. He is also the co-host of the USL Show, part of the Protagonist Podcast Network, I might add, which you can find wherever you get podcasts and, of course, on YouTube. You've probably heard me mention on this podcast before the USL Show. I'm a big fan. They cover so much lower league soccer in the United States, not just the USL Championship, but USL League One. They'll dive into talking about League Two. They talk about the Super League. They'll talk about anything. So, without further ado, let's meet John. Let's get to know him. To my knowledge, there is not a sufficient primer on the mysteriously prolific genius behind USL Tactics, and my goal is to create one here. So, who the hell is John Morrissey? Let's get to know this gentleman. I know that you were a scout for a few USL teams and did some data analysis and provided some type of service, consultation or otherwise. And I want you to take me through that. But I also want to point out there are 24 teams in the USL Championship. There are 14 teams now in League One and more coming. And I'm not even going to get into USL's foray into the first tier with the announcement of the Premier Division. There are also 8 teams now playing and more coming in the USL Super League. And you somehow managed to keep a critical lens on all of them, while I may or may not have an encyclopedic knowledge of one team. They're called Velocity FC, and another in the Super League called Zephyr FC. You've got eyes on, like, what is that? I'm going to do the quick math. 24 plus 14, 46 teams, and there's more coming. I don't know how you do it. Tell me more. Do you have a kink where it's like they added more clubs and it's like the Ocean's 11 meme of like, do you think I need to cover one more? I need to cover one more.
It's probably honestly not far off from that. I think I am. When I get passionate in something, I get obsessive about it.
Yeah.
And boy, soccer hit me in that way to a degree I never saw coming. And it's like once I got a foot in the door with the championship, because that was always the first thing for me. And then that league has become ever closer with League One, leading up to the fact that we're getting interleague competition with the Jägermeister Cup this year. But like being invested in the USL as an entity like that, doing the USL show, which like you mentioned up top, we cover everything. Yeah. I feel a responsibility to like be knowledgeable. If League Two, if the Super League, if any of that comes up, I want to be conversational. And I do enjoy it. Like just straight up, like I find it fun to do the research, to try to understand what is going on at these clubs. So I think it is a little bit of mania, a little bit of this is just my hobby, and they combine nicely.
There's no way that a human being could fake that level of interest, because I've seen how you go about covering the topics of all these different teams when you're doing breakdowns of games or players or anything. And it is wholehearted. So I can't applaud you more than I do frequently on my podcast. I'm a huge fan of your work, and I'm going to pick that big brain of yours to talk about Velocity FC and their 2025 season. We're going to preview the team. I can't wait to talk about the rankings article that you wrote on your website, usltactics.com, which links to your Substack and a range of other things. In fact, I think usltactics.com just resolves on your Substack, if memory serves. Is that correct?
It ought to, yeah.
Okay. It's working. Okay, great. Yeah. So let's get into that in a moment. But before we do that, I want to contextualize a little bit for our listeners this upcoming season by talking about the 7 player signings that we made, but also who's departed the club and who's still here. I'll probably get to who's still here at the end when we take a look at the new players that are coming in. We say goodbye to the ones that are leaving, and then look at like what the team's going to look like in terms of the depth chart and what we think the starting 11 might look like and that sort of thing. So let's start with the departing players. And I'm just going to go through this list really quickly. Chime in on anything that you feel interested in, John. But Joe Schmidt and Morgan Hackworth both retired from professional soccer. Wish them the best. Luke Merrill, who is with us for 10 minutes, has landed with a club in the Armenian Tier 2 league called, and this is the name of his club. I don't remember the name of the league. Might be just be called the Armenian Second Tier League. I can't remember. Ganzasar Kapan FC. You ever heard of that one, John?
No.
There's a lot of clubs all over the world. It would be impossible to know them all. In case you missed it, Brooks Thompson has joined Lexington SC and appears to be their first choice keeper heading into their 2025 season now in the USL Championship. Former winger now, Kamarni Smith, has signed with One Knox, and there's a chance we will see him in our home opener when we host One Knox on March 16th at One Stadium. And then here's the list of other players that are no longer with the team. Ahmed Longmire, huge fan. I'm going to miss Ahmed the most of all the players that have left the club. Ariel Mbumba, Elijah Amaden, Roman Metanir. Roman's still recovering from his knee injury, and I don't know what he'll do next, but I know that the club still holds him in the highest possible regard. A total pro and a complete badass soccer player. Mikey Rojas, Grayson DuPont, Azriel Gonzalez, and Josh Doling. They're all those players, until I hear otherwise, are currently without club. And I will update my listeners whenever I hear anything about our former players, because that's how we roll here. We'll always support the players who have put on our shirt. Do you have any thoughts on any of those departing players, John, before I move on to the next subject?
Kamarni Smith, interesting to me. I think I don't know anything about One Knox insider-wise, but I think there's a chance he gets some real starting minutes for that team, just in terms of
interesting.
A little bit of a change of pace otherwise. So we have one to watch within the league.
Okay, and we'll find out soon enough. I think given the fact that he played 2,000 minutes for us last year across all competitions, that he's definitely ready to go. So it would make a lot of sense. Let's take a quick break. And when we return, we're going to go over these 7 new players that have been signed by Velocity FC for their 2025 season. The presenting sponsor of the Spokane Soccer Show is Flat Stick Pub, the best pub experience in the state of Washington. Local craft beer and wine, signature cocktails, brick oven baked pizza, Bavarian pretzels, and the best watch parties for our beloved Zephyr and Velocity FC. If you're not there with me watching soccer, grab a putter and play some mini golf or duffel board, or check out the golf simulator. I have to say, as a disgustingly competitive person myself, there's literally nothing more entertaining than having a beverage and flexing on your friends in a game of mini golf. It's a perfect icebreaker too. Maybe first date. I think they won in a Best of Inlander for first date, which makes a ton of sense. You'll never have a socially awkward moment again if you spend your social outings at Flatstick. Don't take my word for it. Head down to Flatstick in downtown Spokane or go to flatstickpub.com to book a tea time or check out their latest tap list. The Spokane Soccer Show is supported by Spokane City Credit Union. Are you still a member of a big dumb bank? Didn't I tell you to stop it? I don't even have to tell you which banks I mean. You all know the ones I'm talking about. Well, once upon a time, credit unions were wisely described as a not-for-profit, not-for-charity, but for service. And SCCU still holds that philosophy today. At a bank, you're just a customer. At a credit union, you're both a member and a shareholder. Throughout 2025, I will be updating my listeners about SCCU's commitment to the Greater Spokane Parks Challenge. Speaking of great parks, first up is our crown jewel, aka Riverfront Park. Be sure to join me and our friends at the Northwest Autism Center on April 26th down at the Ice Age Playground for the annual 5K Walk, Run, or Roll Steps for Autism. Come join us to celebrate community, inclusion, and awareness of autism by registering now at stepsforautism.org. Okay, we're back. I forgot to ask you a question. I think you wrote a piece and or maybe both, did a podcast or did some content on the USL show about Indy 11 and your affinity for that club and the tumult of what they're going through with this whole flirtation with the MLS and Don Garber and all that stuff. I don't want to get into that because that's a whole topic itself, but it just sprung back into my memory that's what was the kind of probably the jumping off point for your interest in USL soccer. You had mentioned it, Indy 11, but I'll try to find links to that article. I think did you write an article? What was it?
Yeah, Substack article.
Okay.
Right when the news broke.
Oh, that's right. It was a really beautiful piece. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
One of the most heartfelt things.
Yes, exactly. There was some pathos in there. I'm like, this is not a tone I've seen yet from Morrissey, and it was very, very touching and powerful. Like sometimes people want to know about the stakes of this whole soccer wars thing, and I'm like, there you go. That's it right there.
I mean, I think you guys are probably experiencing it in Spokane. Like you really get attached to these things, these people, this club, the community around it. And when that comes under threat from something that you kind of don't have any real respect for, I think that can hit you like a ton of bricks.
Totally. So for my listeners who don't know, the Major League Soccer, the MLS, has been in conversation for a long time. In fact, there was a previous attempt to Indy 11 originally wanted to be part of the MLS and didn't make the cut, quote unquote. And so there's definitely some disagreement between the ownership of Indy 11 and MLS. And so they may go a different route and pick a different ownership group. There's a whole thing with the mayor and some late night seduction happening with the MLS and Don Garber and the mayor of Indianapolis. It's all pretty unsavory in my view. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, people know my feelings about the MLS, but I won't get into that here. Let's talk about the incoming players for Velocity FC in 2025.
Absolutely.
I'm going to start at the back. I did this last year with our friend Brandon Mays. Have you done a podcast before with Brandon? I assume you have. Maybe you guys haven't.
Maybe once. We've DM'd 100 million times, but yeah, never on mic together.
He's tough to pin down. Busy guy. He's a dad and he runs a coffee shop and stuff, but he's brilliant, and I loved having him on the podcast last year. We're going to do that similar type of thing. I'm just going to pick your brains about these players and get some deeper insight. So I'm just going to start from goalkeeper to defenders to midfielders to forwards. There's 7 players, and we'll just start at the back. The newest goalkeeper added to our squad in the latest signing. And if you don't know much about this player, I won't be shocked because there's not much on him, John. It's Ryan Bilichuk. He is a 24-year-old, 6'3" goalkeeper. He's a dual citizen like our very special Zephyr FC player, Sophie Braun. She has family in Argentina, and so does Ryan. He grew up, though, in Greenville, South Carolina, and was drafted in the 2023 MLS Super Draft by the Portland Timbers. And if you know anything about Portland Timbers, they don't give a crap about their youth players. If they heard me say that, they would disagree. But every piece of evidence available suggests otherwise. So he's what I would just classically describe as a wait and see player. He did play for the University of South Carolina, which I don't think I have here, but I can tell you that I watched his tape from college. He played quite a bit for Timbers too, and that's not easy footage to come by. He could be brilliant. I just want to see him play in League One. Looks to be, and this is my very quick read on Ryan Bilichuk, a very talented young shot stopper. Kind of looks, I hate to say this because it's like, do we have 2 keepers of similar ilk? He looks Morancio-esque, similar size, and has that same type of like cat-like big dude instincts to stop shots. But I hope he's comfortable playing the ball at his feet, because last year, I think the reason why we ended up with Brooks Thompson in our squad was because of his comfort coming out as that kind of sweeper keeper role. Do you know anything, John Morrissey, about Ryan Bilichuk?
I won't claim I've watched a ton of the guy.
Yeah.
But I think you're right to point to the kind of comfort with playing with the ball at his feet. Somebody who was around like the top third of MLS Next Pro over the last 2 years in terms of playing short passes, avoiding long balls. Obviously, like the primary goal of a goalkeeper is to stop shots from going into the net. And I think you can have some questions about the track record there. But I think it's also an interesting challenge for a goalie in MLS Next Pro. Like those are younger defenses. Those are teams that can often sway towards development more than winning games.
Oh, you're saying, let me clarify. You're saying he was in the top third of, or top 3 of goalkeepers at playing the ball at his feet?
In terms of, I tend to use passing length as a
sure
proxy for it.
Yeah.
So he tends to play shorter passes than 66% of the goalies who were in Next Pro.
Oh, excellent. Which suggests that he's used to that possession game as a keeper. Okay.
You worry a bit about like underperforming the expected completion rate, but again, how much of that is the defense in front of him and the people in front of him?
Okay.
Profile wise, he seems like he's built for the system.
Did you catch a save percentage out of his time with Portland? I think I saw 65%, which is just
65-ish,
which is pretty averagey, right?
Pretty average, lower end of average.
Yeah. again, so many contextual things that are tough to figure out with keepers. So
goalkeeping is a thing where the numbers matter, but if you've got a goalkeeping coach or a scout who knows what they're talking about, they can go far beyond whatever the numbers can do.
Okay. Very, very interesting. All right. So put a pin in Ryan Bilichuk because I haven't seen him. I don't know anything about him other than what you can find through a little bit of YouTube searches and some tape from college when he played for South Carolina.
About Next Pro, by the way. Impossible to try to find anything relevant about from that league.
That is one consistent thing I've learned is that it's much easier to find tape from a kid playing for some D2 college than it is for playing for an MLS Next Pro team. Don't get me started. Okay, let's move along to every one of these announcements I think is remarkable. So I'm going to try not to use adjectives too often. So let's just get right to it. Defenders. I'll start with the order in which they were announced by the club. Lucky Opara, 25-year-old 6-foot defender, born in Nigeria, played professional soccer at a super early age, I think 18 or 19. He went to some fascinating places too, by the way. I'm not going to even name the names of the clubs, but starting at age 18 or 19, he was playing in Latvia for a few years, then Switzerland, then Finland, then Estonia. And in 2023, he somehow made his way to our friend and former coach of Northern Colorado, Ayman Zayed. And for Colorado, he made 67 appearances in 2 seasons, had 6 goals and 11 assists, so 17 goal contributions, along with 15 clean sheets. And I'm going to quote John Morrissey. You may have heard of this gentleman, who writes for USLTactics.com. Opara rarely got assigned the sexy work for a high-flying Northern Colorado team, but his versatility allowed him to do a bang-up job across their back four. The ex-Hailstorm stalwart won 80% of his tackle attempts in league play in 2024, all while posting 2.7 takeaways per match. Tell my listener about 2.7 takeaways per match, what that means.
Yeah, just a neat way of saying tackles and interceptions. I tend to think of defensive actions as clearances and blocks are a little bit more passive. You're on the back foot. You're trying to stop things. Tackles and interceptions innately, you're kind of pushing forward.
It's like reactive versus active actions.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a sign of aggression and an ability to play in a system where you want to push forward. You want to be the aggressor.
Okay. Tell me your thoughts about Lucky Opara.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that stands out with him is the versatility, certainly. He can play right back. He can play left back. He did so in Northern Colorado. And I think the baseline of what I talked about in the piece with that tackle percentage, not only can he play in a system where he's tasked with doing a lot of defending, he's very efficient at it. Good about his sense for getting forward. I don't know if I would call him the most technical fullback in the league, but certainly up to par and even above it in terms of the skill in the final third. Very good instinct as a mover without the ball as well. Somebody who can open up space for his teammates. And I think all of those aspects of his game really shone with the Hailstorm. He feels like a very solid addition for what this team wants to do as they work from back to front, while also providing the solidity and the comfort alongside David Garcia, another signing we'll get to.
Yep. One of the things I find super fascinating about the signing is I was listening to Ayman Zayed talk yesterday on the USL show. You and your co-host Kaylor, along with our friend Alex Ashton, aka League One Updater, had Ayman Zayed on as a special guest to talk about your rankings and just discuss like the preview of the entire League One. And it made me think of something really interesting when he was talking about effusive praise for Lucky Opara. And I mean, I'm quoting him here. He was like, I see, he looked at I think your projected starting 11. And he was like, I would take Lucky Opara over either Derek Waldeck or Javier Martin Hill. And I think those are 2 really good fullbacks, but it's hard to put into words what Ayman thinks of Lucky Opara. He's like, I don't think there's a better right back in League One. And he felt bad that he played him out of position as a left back, even though he did a competent job, because he said he's far more comfortable on the right. And he thinks he is a technically better right back than Bruno Rendon, but Rendon is this specimen of athleticism. And he's like, I had to inflict Rendon on our opponents because of his ability on the break and so forth. But technically speaking, ball at his feet, 1v1 defending, he's like, I think Lucky Opara is the best right back in League One. And I was just kind of like, whoa. So I got a hold of Ayman Zayed earlier today, and I got a couple words from him on each of these players. They're just like, we've signed 3 Northern Colorado players. This is the first of 3 former Northern Colorado players. And keep in mind, for my listener, I just got to make sure I pause to say these things. Northern Colorado won the Jägermeister Cup last year. They finished second in the league. So even though we beat them in our final of 5 fixtures against Northern Colorado, we won our 5th convincingly in the championship run that we made in the League One playoffs. That was a very, very good team. And Ayman Zayed is a fantastic coach. And here's some quotes from him about Lucky. One of the best fullbacks, technically better than Bruno in his mind. He's intelligent. You can move him all over the pitch. He's a defender who loves to get forward. He's an excellent one-on-one defender. He doesn't think there's a better right back in the league, including Stephen Payne. He just thinks he's an outstanding team player. And so I'll just ask, what do we think Lucky's role is going to be with Velocity this year?
Yeah, I mean, hearing from Ayman, certainly, at least when I was going about the practice of maybe trying to project depth charts, I kind of had Opara as, to call him a bench player would be incorrect, but somebody who would fill minutes at left back, fill minutes at right back, kind of do both. Hearing that review from Ayman makes me feel like he probably will be the starting right back for this team. And I mean, if what Coach Zayed says pans out, then you're expecting him to be one of the better players in the league. Like Bruno Rendon won Defender of the Year and earned a move to the championship. If Opara is 70% as good as that, you've got a borderline all-league player.
It's crazy. I do think, I have a kind of similar thought that once he's in market and, all these players that are foreign born have to go through certain process of whatever, of like to get in market, to get match fit. I think Lucky's going to compete for the starting role at right back. And I don't see him displacing Waldeck. I think Waldeck is just going to be a fixture at left back so long as he wants to play for us. But depending on how Javier Martin Hill develops, who I absolutely adore as a player and thought he was fantastic last year and developed a lot in his first season as a professional player, that is just going to be that's going to be a very stiff competition at right back. And it made me think about the fact that we lost Roman Metenier as our starting right back to begin last year. And I think Javier Martin Hill was supposed to be the kind of deputy. And because of the injury to Metenier pretty early in the season, it was like Javier Martin Hill got kind of thrown into the deep end and did a very, very good job on the whole. But it's just going to be there's going to be a lot of competition at that role. Any other thoughts on Lucky before we move on?
Yeah, no, good player.
Okay. All right, let's talk about his teammate at Northern Colorado last year, 24-year-old. I have different heights on this player, but I think he's 6 foot. He may be fudging it a little bit, but you'll see things ranging from 5'11" to 6'2". Who cares? He's 24-year-old center back David Garcia. He grew up in Mallorca in Spain and played college soccer for Florida International and started his professional career in League One, where he won the League One He won the League One championship with teammate and former Velocity FC goalkeeper Brooks Thompson in 2023 with North Carolina FC. And then last year, of course, with Northern Colorado, won the Jägermeister Cup and made 62 appearances as a professional so far in his career, has added 7 goals to go with 22 clean sheets. And last year, he was named to the USL All League One first team. All right, quoting John Morrissey, among the league's best right-footed center backs, Garcia has picked up a trophy in each of his last 2 seasons between North Carolina and Northern Colorado. He won more than 60% of his duels and completed upwards of 85% of his passes last season, proving to be a model of efficiency that will fit like a glove in Lee Wiedmann's back line. I can't tell you how excited I am about David Garcia. Tell me more, John. Get me more excited.
He's a player that I think got to be in the championship. Like, I know people said that about Lucky Opara, but for me, Garcia is that guy. I think what's interesting is that if you look at, another metric of how important a player is to their team's possession game, is the share of total touches that they take. He was top 5 in the league by that number. So whenever Northern Colorado was trying to work out from the back, Garcia was on the ball. Often for Northern Colorado, that meant biding your time until you could pick out something over the top, find that pace of Rendon.
Mm.
It'll be a little bit different for Spokane, but he's got that precision. He was asked to be that precise when he was with North Carolina. I think when you throw in the fact that he's a tremendous one-on-one defender, you really can't ask for much more at the back in this league.
I'm really, really grateful that I'm a huge fan. Anyone who's listened to this podcast knows how much I love and respect Ahmed Longmire as a player. And I know he had a couple ups and downs last year, but he was mostly our best defender, and I think by a good margin. In terms of just can make that really quick recovery tackle like he did notoriously against Lagos Kunga, who thought he was in on goal, and because he had totally skinned Marcelo Lage. And here comes Ahmed just like out of nowhere, puts in a perfect tackle. So replacing our right center back with David Garcia makes me really happy. Here's what Ammon had to say about him. On the ball, he likes to break lines. He's great on the ball. He likes to break lines and join attack. He is a Rolls Royce of a defender. He should be playing at a higher level than USL League One. And yes, he said the same thing about Lucky Opara. Really understands the principles of not getting beat in transition. And I can't wait to talk more about that. He will use his body to keep a really athletic player from beating him one-on-one and getting in behind him. And I think between David Garcia and Lucky, the fact that they were trained, this is something that AMN just believed so adamantly, do not get beat on the counter. Well, it came up a little bit on the USL show last night, and anyone who remembers me ranting and raving about this last year, part of the trouble of playing a high possession, high up the pitch sort of a attack that we like to operate in is you leave yourself vulnerable on here's a second ball and boom, they're on the counter. And we got beat on counterattacks a lot last year. I mean, I lost track of the players trying to remember who beat us. Right. Mensah, McKinnon, Rendon, Misael Rodriguez, like just the list was endless. Christian Chaney, and it was always the same thing. A clearance, a second ball, other teams kind of knew it. Boom, off to the races. Here comes Rapopo Mensah. Like, oh God, we just got beat again. I'm a Newcastle fan. Gabriel Obertan is 35 years old. Was never a pace merchant, even in his best years of Manchester United and Newcastle United. He beat us right up the spine on a counter. So anyways, I love the idea that both David and Lucky have that knack for we are not going to get beat on the transition. In fact, like Ammon is like, I don't think we got beat once on a counterattack.
Just to further the transition point,
Real
and Tormenta were the two teams that gave up the most goals on the fast break last year.
Wait, who were?
Returning teams. Tormenta and Spokane.
Oh, God.
So, and granted, I'm not including Fuego because we all know Fuego gonna Fuego. But yeah, Spokane, that was an area of improvement that I think by getting those guys from Northern Colorado who are good about knowing when to step forward, knowing when to push up the line of confrontation, but can defend in those situations, paramount for this team.
Okay. Roll with velocity this year. 3-2-1. We'll say the same thing. Presumably nailed on at right center back, replacing Ahmed Longmire.
Absolutely.
Nothing more to see there. Welcome to the team, David Garcia. Okay. In the midfield, a fellow Spaniard. Whew, this one. I love this one. Nil Vinyals, 28-year-old central midfielder, grew up in Barcelona, played college soccer for Winthrop Eagles in South Carolina. I had not heard of that team until I Googled them today. He is one of the most beloved and talented players in the history of League One. He's made 152 appearances with both Tormenta and Richmond Kickers, where he has scored 23 goals and assisted 19. He was a very key part of the 2022 Richmond Kickers season, where they finished top of the table and won the Players' Shield. He was also named in 2023 to the USL All League One first team and to the 2024 All League One second team. In our first couple of games, John, knowing nothing about League One, my story is similar to yours. It's like I love USL soccer now because my town has a team in it. So I'm done with the Premier League. I've forgotten tons about Newcastle, my beloved Newcastle United. I don't pay much attention to the Premier League anymore. In those first couple games, we went to play Greenville and lost 3-1 on March 9th. And then on March 16th, we hosted our first ever home game against Richmond and won that game 2-1. But in those games, the short list of players that I was like, oh my God, Liam McKinnon in the first game. Mm-hmm. And in the second game, it was Neil Vignoles. I was just like, this dude just looks different. On ball, comfortable, just he likes to work spaces where other players aren't. Just intelligent attacking player and just a fantastic passer of the ball. And according to our friend Alex Ashton, who is a Richmond Kicker supporter, in case you didn't realize that, he's also a world-class human being. From your article, you said this: arguably the best passer in League One. Okay, I can't wait to hear more about this. Vignoles made more than 100 appearances in Richmond before decamping for the Northwest this offseason. The 28-year-old pitched in 6 assists across USL competitions last year on 94th percentile XA, expected assists, and his ability to carve out space to create from the left half space is unmatched in the third division. For my listeners who don't remember him, tell us what you know and think and feel about Neil Vignoles, John.
I think that at the level of the USL, and particularly USL League One, it's rare to find a guy that whenever he gets a touch, he doesn't feel rushed. He understands the space. He understands the pressure around him. Vignoles is that level of player who has that headiness, who has that awareness constantly. It feels like every time that the ball leaves his feet, it's going somewhere useful and advancing play. That can come from a deeper position, but he's equally incisive, closer to goal in the zone 14, kind of edge of the box area. Obviously, I just called him the best passer in the league, and I stand by that. I think he is kind of head and shoulders above 95% of the central midfielders, certainly in League One, in terms of what he can do when he is trying to find a teammate.
And I think he's just going to be a different flavor of a that kind of 10 attacking 8 profile that we've seen so much of. And of course, our city is in love with Luis Heel. I think of Luis Heel as being a little bit more tenacious, a little more bulldog, a little more head down. Whereas, Vignoles has that kind of temperament of just composure. That's a great way to describe it. He's just kind of like, he's chilling. He never looks like he's rushing anything. Luis is the type player he's really effective in press too. So he'll nick the ball off of an opponent, as he did against, I think it was Central Valley Fuego. No, it wasn't. It was Union Omaha. He had an axe to grind in that game. But I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what happens in the usage of Neil Vignoles. So let's just go ahead and get the question out there. What do we think his role is going to be?
I mean, I see him as a starter. I don't think that's a real question.
He has to be.
He has to be.
He's in his prime. He's 28 years old. For anyone who doesn't know, that is the prime of a soccer player.
You look at a player in his prime with that skill set, coming over from an interleague competitor. I tend to think, depending on the shape, and I map it up as kind of a 4-1-4-1-ish, but it's the same as a 4-2-3-1. The formation labels don't really matter that much.
They don't.
Vignoles feels like a guy who he'll defend a little bit deeper, but when you're in possession, he'll step up. He'll be kind of a number 10, kind of in that left pocket if he can be. Good with both of his feet, really. So it adds that level of flexibility for him. But yeah, nailed on starter, somebody who's going to have a real impact going both ways.
I'm going to save my thoughts about where I think he's going to be deployed until the end. And it definitely changed after talking to Ayman Zayed.
Okay, I love it.
Yeah. But I agree with you. He's going to start. All right. Let's talk about the forwards. Whew, I have to towel off here. This is these are some spicy nachos coming through here. All right. Let's start with the most exciting, the player who, when I ran into Lee Veidman down at Flatstick Pub, the beloved presenting sponsor of the Spokane Soccer Show, he was Cheshire grinning in the anticipation of this player being signed. I'm talking about none other than, of course, Nico Brett, 32-year-old, 5'8" center forward from Kingston, Jamaica. I have to also talk about Andre Lewis, who really could barely contain himself, his glee in terms of getting a fellow countryman. He obviously knows Nico really well. They're close. They're a couple years apart in age, but they both grew up in Kingston and obviously know each other quite well. Nico played his college soccer in the U.S. for Robert Morris Cardinals in Pennsylvania. He was the 40th pick in the 2016 MLS Super Draft by, again, the Portland Timbers. They held on to him long enough to realize that he's pretty damn good before letting him go to the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, where he made 67 appearances and scored 32 goals, which I found this brilliantly coincidental. That's the exact same number of appearances and goals that he had in college. Nico then had a shift, a few stints in a combination of Birmingham Legion and New Mexico United in the USL Championship before last year, when a shoulder injury meant that he was tabled after the first 4 games and made only those 4 appearances for the now defunct Memphis 901. Do you want to remind me? They transferred their franchise rights to who?
Santa Barbara
Sky,
joined League One,
who was originally going to go into League One, but because Memphis was like, we're out of the soccer business, they gave it to Santa Barbara. So shout out Peter Moore, and good luck to them. Okay, let's get this out of the way, dude. This is a phenomenal signing. Brett has scored 82 goals and assisted 30 more across 191 appearances in the USL Championship, which qualifies as the second most goals in the history of the USL Championship. He is 32 and turns 33 in a few weeks. However, I want to remind people, he sat out last year and rested those legs, didn't have a leg injury, had a shoulder injury. And if he's anything like the player that he was a couple years ago, my God. So this is what John had to say in his article. Though he missed most of the 2024 season with an injury, Brett put up 46 goals between 2020 and 2023 to cement himself as one of the USL's, not just League One's, most reliable scorers. The goals are a guarantee, but Brett's contributions in the press and as a hold-up player will be fascinating to track in Spokane. If things go well and a rested version of Nico Brett is playing in League One, what's going to happen for Velocity FC this year, John Morrissey?
On talent alone, if you're looking for who is the most consistent finisher in League One, it's Nico Brett. Like, there's nobody with the scoring profile that he brings to the table. I cited that 46 goals since 2020 stat on a 22% conversion rate, which is very high, exceeding his expected goals by a sum a little bit over 5. So
oh my
he's
God.
doing better than you would anticipate.
Stop.
This is a guy who's just, he has, not only is he a good finisher, but he has a sixth sense for getting into the right positions, for making himself available on the end of service. On his day, he's a special player. And I think you're very correct to point out the shoulder versus leg distinction.
Yeah.
That matters for a forward in his position. So I think, and he's really not somebody who is dominant in the air. He's physical, but he's not reliant on that in a way where you don't worry about a year off. Like, he'll be okay. And the instinct, the finishing, like I said, that's going to carry him to easily a dozen goals, if you ask me.
I just don't think I can qualify this enough for the listeners who are huge fans of Spokane and witnessed us really struggle to score goals. And let's be honest, our striker, Josh Doling, struggled to score goals last year. He scored a couple from the penalty spot, a couple more from the run of play, but it was tough. And I think he liked to play and operate from deeper lying positions. I think he would, what's really what's kind of fucked up, John. This will be, look, I really do mean this from the heart. I think Josh Doling would have been a really great second striker to a player like Nico Brett.
Probably.
You know what I mean?
It's his profile.
Playing him in behind. He was starting to show that even with Anwar Pelaez, but he's gone and it is what it is. I think Nico reminds me a little bit of another League One player, just in terms of just like finishing quality, of a player who I think might even be a little underrated in Galindrez from Forward Madison. Just a guy who doesn't need more than half of a chance and it's going to go in the back of the net. And like a composed finisher.
Absolutely. And two players that they look like the kind of physical hoss, the guy who's going to have to throw his body around, and they kind of belie that because they're so skillful. They're so sharp whenever they get one sniff of goal. So that's what you can expect.
Yeah.
He's going to ride the back shoulder of defenders and do his thing.
Of course, he scored from the bike in a game a couple of years ago. So go check YouTube and you'll see that. Watch his highlights. It's remarkable to see what he does with very little. You just cannot take your eyes off of him for a second because he's got that sort of poacher quality where he's going to find that little nook and cranny. And if he gets half a chance, he's going to bury it. just a really, really outstanding finisher at this level, especially. What will his role be with Velocity this year, John?
Starter. Making it easy.
When he's fit, he's got to be nailed on as a starter. I think Anwar Pelaez will be the starter at the beginning of the season because I don't know when Nico will join us and be match fit and in market, but Brett will eventually get the nod. Even the idea of both of them in a 2-striker set, if they should both be fit, say in the fall and it's like playoff time, oh my God. But yeah, I have to add this because it came up on the podcast yesterday, the USL show. Ayman Zayed was like, Nico Brett is a finisher, and he's his pick for the Golden Boot winner in League One for this year. Let's get to the last of our Northern Colorado Hailstorm players that are joining us. Speaking of Ayman Zayed, Marky Hernandez, 28-year-old, 5'5" winger from Anaheim, California. Marky played his youth soccer for the now defunct Chivas USA, which was previously in the MLS and was an affiliate of Chivas from Liga MX. He played his college soccer for Cal State Fullerton before playing pre-professional soccer for a couple USL League Two teams. Marky started his professional career in League One in 2020 with the Chattanooga Red Wolves and was a teammate of Ayman Zayed and had actually provided service on a goal that Ayman scored once upon a time, which I thought was a great anecdote. And he spent the last 3 seasons with Northern Colorado Hailstorm, where Marky Hernandez had 129 appearances, scored 26 goals, and assisted 17 more, and can play on the right or the left as a winger. He can play in the midfield, but it doesn't look like that's been frequently the case. Tell me what you know, John, about Marky Hernandez.
I think he's a guy with a great work rate. You're never going to watch a game with Marky Hernandez in it where he's not going all out, getting in people's faces, being selfless when he doesn't have the ball. And I think what really speaks to his character was the way he was willing to accept a little bit of a smaller role last season for Northern Colorado, often used as that first sub off the bench, but effective in doing it. He had 5 goal contributions coming off of the bench last year. That's a big deal for somebody to make an impact if they start, yes, but be an impact player, come immediately with the intensity whenever they're called upon. I think that's why Hernandez stuck around in Northern Colorado, and I think that's why he's a useful piece for the Velocity.
I would take that level of goal contribution from a starter, you know?
Absolutely.
I don't want to throw shade here, but like we've talked about this. Kamarni Smith played 2,000 minutes for us and had 0 goal contributions. So to have that level of production, it's just the number one thing. And it's this, I love what you said because it dovetails perfectly with what Ayman had to say. One of his first signings, he did play with him at Chattanooga, gives everything, plays with his entire heart, runs 100 miles an hour at all times. He wants to start, but he's never going to complain if he does come off the bench and play those 30 minutes. Plus, I always have this like sneaking suspicion that players of the quality of like a Marky Hernandez, they love to run at tired defenses. I mean, come on.
For sure. They relish it.
Yeah, come on. He just said flat out wants to score, wants to get an assist. He, like Ayman, believes that when you're a winger, first and foremost, it's end product. You have to produce goal contributions. That's your goal, or that's your job. And he's the first one on and the last one off when it comes to training. He trains as he plays. This is me quoting Ayman here. He wants to win everything. Doesn't matter what it is. He said it could be 5-a-side passing drills. He is a maniac in training. He said, I mean, he said I could say this, maybe even too much so. He's like, you'll see him the day before a game and he's doing CrossFit and you're like, bro, what are you doing? You need to chill. And he needs to listen to his strength and conditioning coach. Like he said, he trains like a 13-year-old boy, just filled with joy for the game. And he said the mistake that opponents make is that he's a small dude. He's 5'5", and other teams think, oh, we don't have to mark that guy. Well, take your eyes off him. And if you're 5'5" and you're unmarked, you might as well be 12'7". So he'll get on the end of headers, and he's a great finisher with his head. So anyway, it was a thrilling description of Marky Hernandez. So what do you think his role is going to be, John?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing him as super sub. Does that mean he's not going to start ever? No, he'll get some minutes on both wings because that's what he does.
Yeah.
But I think for what were the reasons we just talked about, probably slotting him in as first guy off the bench
on the left. Yeah, that feels Sorry, Marky, if you want to start, because whatever, he's going to start, and we've got a few competitions. Maybe we make a cup run in the Open Cup. We got the Jägermeister Cup. He'll make his starts too, but that's how I've him described. He's a consummate super sub, maybe second only in League One to Lagos Kunga. Whew, Marky Hernandez, can't wait to see. And the other thing that Eamon said is he's going to be a crowd favorite. Spokane's going to fall totally in love with that dude. Because the moment he hits a pitch, it reminds me a little bit, and I feel really bad for a couple players that we had last year that didn't really get a chance to play for us because of injury. One being Grayson DuPont, who played just like a maniac. And I think it just really sucked. He got hurt 9 minutes into his first appearance against Greenville. Mikey Rojas, who grew up in Othello, Washington, really unfortunate, had a season-ending injury effectively because it took him so long to recover from a surgery on his foot that he didn't get a chance to crack back in. It was toward the playoffs. But those players like that were showing some stuff coming off the bench. Well, Marky Hernandez is one of those, but he comes off the bench and does shit. He scores goals or he assists goals and just terrorizes defenders. So we're almost at the end here. Last player, I think.
Yeah.
Siobhan John Brown, 29-year-old, 5'8" forward, born in Canada to immigrants from Grenada, but spent most of his childhood in a parish in Grenada called St. Patrick. Siobhan played D2 college for a tiny school, 750 students, called Alderson Broaddus University. Yeah, there's a lot of colleges in the United States, folks. Between 2017 and 2024, I find Siobhan John Brown's story fascinating. He played a combination of amateur and professional soccer in USL League 2. He played for Hard Rock FC in Grenada's Premier Division. He's played in the NPSL. These are different leagues, folks. He's played in the EPSL. He's played in Nisa. He even had a cup of coffee for FCA Darmstadt in Germany's 7th tier of football. That league is called the Gruppenliga Darmstadt. I mean, I don't even know how long he played there. After an unsuccessful, short-lived journey with El Paso Locomotive, one of the worst teams in the USL Championship, he fell to Jermaine Jones. Sorry, Dan Vaughn. He fell to Jermaine Jones last year with Central Vallefuego and made 26 appearances, scored 4 goals, and added 3 assists in a team that was certifiably quite bad. And I will just start here. I thought SJB, Siobhan John Brown, was remarkable every time we played them. Tell me what you know, John, about the journeyman soccer player called Siobhan John Brown.
I mean, the guy is a dynamo. He's electric when he can get a touch. Very good about finding space on the breakaway, finding space on the counter. Digging into the numbers a little bit today, I was maybe surprised to find he took the ball away in the press more than any other player in the league last season.
Oh,
he's a guy with a motor. He knows how to go at opponents, make them uncomfortable, do things that are really effective, and arguably kind of add a piece to the puzzle that Spokane didn't always have in 2024. So this signing is kind of the thing that when I was looking at this offseason, I'm like, Spokane is going to be a very good team. John Brown kind of feels like the perfect piece to complete that puzzle and be that guy.
Oh, I love this. Okay, I have so many thoughts about this. He's a player where, so I'm so glad you have the data because I'm just going to give some anecdotes. Every time we played Central Vallefuego, we played them a few times because we were in their pool in their group in the Jägermeister Cup. He was the kind of guy when he got either had the ball or didn't have the ball, but he was near the ball. I just found myself feeling anxious and a little pissed off because I'm like, that guy's going to do something bad to us. And I'd be like, I wish he was on our team.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not making this shit up. He's one of those players that I wrote down as like Neil Vignals and obviously Liam McKinnon. I mean, come on. But like a player, I'm like, I just wish he was on our team because of his endeavor and his work rate. Now, it feels like we're getting to, I'm going to both lead the witness and jump ahead here. He's clearly, to me, the replacement to on the right where Kamarni Smith was playing. Now, what Kamarni Smith did do well for us last year is his work rate. He always came back and helped defensively. In fact, he probably helped prevent a lot of those counterattacks that we were talking about before. But you describing Siobhan John Brown as not only a guy who provides end product, but also contribution in the press just makes me very, very happy because it's the end product that we didn't get. I mean, I loved the work rate and endeavor from Kamarni, but there was just never any end product. And he wasn't much of he couldn't really attack 1v1 either. He would get dispossessed quite frequently when he tried to dribble. I think on ball, I don't have any stats in front of me. I think Siobhan John Brown's a more capable dribbler too.
He was about average, if memory serves, in terms of the dribble success.
Okay.
He's willing to take players on, and I would call him an upgrade over Kamarni at a minimum.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where we probably see him slotting in, is on the right, replacing the minutes that were given to Kamarni Smith last year. We made it to the list of 7 players that we've added. There may be more, but we're not getting into those now. Let's take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to go over what we think the starting 11 may or may not look like and break down any strengths or weaknesses that we see in Velocity FC's 2025 squad. The Spokane Soccer Show would not be possible without the support of Feast World Kitchen. You know what else wouldn't be possible without Feast World Kitchen? Mouth-watering cuisine from every region of planet Earth. That's what. Feast is a nonprofit that helps immigrants and former refugees in our community become chef entrepreneurs. Barbacoa tacos, yum Korean fried chicken, ashak dumplings, lasagna bolognese, warbat bilishta, mango mousse. That's just a few of the delicious dishes being served up during restaurant week. And lucky you, because Feast is open every week from Wednesday through Sunday on 3rd Avenue in downtown Spokane. To learn more about Feast World Kitchen, their current menu, or to order some of that delicious food online, go to feastworldkitchen.org. It fills me with joy to announce that Wildland Co-op is a sponsor of the Spokane Soccer Show. What is Wildland Co-op? Wildland is a small farm, it's a brewery, it's a winery, and it's a local goods market. 20 varieties of beer on tap, guaranteed to be something you're going to dig. A range of fantastic wines and tasty non-alcoholic beverages. So pull up an Adirondack chair on their cherry tree patio and take in all those yummy flavors amidst sweeping views of Green Bluff and the foothills of Mount Spokane. There is literally not a better place in the 509 to gawk at the warm, dreamlike skies during golden hour. I've almost run out of room on my phone taking photos of it. And that's actually a true story. The Wildland Co-op is family friendly, everybody's welcome, and if you'll recall, last year, their head brewer, Michael, took me up on the idea of making a signature beer for the Spokane Soccer Show. Remember the double pivot pub ale? We're doing it again this year, folks. No announcements yet, but stay tuned. We're going to do a different beer. We don't even know what we're going to do yet, but we're going to do something really cool. For more information, go to their website or follow them on Instagram, Wildland Co-op. That's wildland.coop. Okay, we're back. John Morrissey, I have a bone to pick with you about your projected starting 11. No, I'm kidding. This is all going to be fun. You and I are going to fling some shit at the walls and see what sticks. Probably none of it. All right. Let's start from this perspective. Assuming every one of these players that we've signed is in market, I'm not going to say they're in form because form is fleeting, but they're match fit. Just assuming these are the variables, okay? The controls we're going to put in place before we fart around with the starting 11. Assuming that that's all true, what we see is a starting 11. I'm going to start with your the image that I saw on your. It got updated because you added Siobhan John Brown. So this is what you see as just a kind of you playing around. And let me just ask you: is your rationale for this what you would do, or what you kind of think Lee Wiedemann might play around with? Or some combination.
Yeah, a little bit of both. Of where I feel confident about players starting, definitely going to slot it in. Where there are guys like Derek Waldeck, he played there last season, he's back. That feels obvious.
Yeah. Where
it's a little bit of leeway where players are coming in. Like Neil Vigneault's you think is going to be a starter, but there is an assumption to make. So yeah.
And these 7
art and science.
Yeah, totally. It is equal parts art and science. And these 7 players that have been added, to be clear, other than this goalkeeper kid, they're all like starting players from other League One or championship teams. So we kind of have to assume they have a very good chance of being in the starting 11 at the beginning of the season. And even if that's just 6 players, that's more than half of your squad. So without further ado, let's go over your projected starting 11 that you played with. You've got Morrissey in goal. I think we both do because we just don't know what to expect of this young player that was just added. A back line, you have Waldeck on the left. Your center backs are Cameron Miller and David Garcia. And on the right, you have Javier Martin Hill. I think you already mentioned that you might want to change that.
Yeah, man, I'll fold like a card table on that one.
Yeah, I will too.
Hearing about Opara. Yeah.
Same. I changed mine too. Actually, I realized I haven't changed mine. So interesting. I'll leave mine the way it was. Okay. In midfield, from left to right, you have Masongo Akale, and then the central midfielders, you have Nil Vignoles with Andre Lewis, and then Siobhan John Brown on the right. And then you have a 2-striker set with Brett as the 9 and Nico Brett as the 9 and the main center forward, and then Luis Hill as kind of a second striker. Any thoughts that you want to go over with any of that before we play with my formation, or do we want to use mine to talk about it?
I'll just quickly kind of slide in with the note on Hill and the role he'll play. Obviously, I'm making these things in Excel. Like, this is pretty limited in terms of how flexible I'm going to get with the depth chart.
Yeah.
He's somebody, Luis Hill, who he'll drop in like a number 10. He might press occasionally up, is more of a forward. Again, art versus science, it's a lot of leeway. So if you're calling this a 4-2-3-1 versus a 4-4-2, we're basically speaking the same language.
Yeah.
So people struggle to get that concept, so I always feel the need to just kind of throw out the disclaimer. But yeah.
Yeah. All caveats applied. The other thing we have to remember is that Luis Hill did play as a kind of second striker winger role a few times for us last year. And sure. I didn't totally love the outcome of that because I just think the loss of his class in the midfield. But if you've got Nil Vignoles pulling strings with Andre, because one of my favorite things to watch was kind of the 2-man game. Sorry, I use a lot of basketball references because I'm also a basketball dork. The 2-man game with Luis and Andre was really special last year. So whatever happens with this team this year, I want to see Luis and Andre get a chance to cook together because they started to develop this understanding of each other, and it was brilliant. Here's what I had. I'm just going to play with this as a 4-2-3-1, the way that Wiedemann set up the team for 80% of last year, and then we can just do a little playing here. So obviously Morrissey as well. I have Waldeck on the back of the left. So the back line, I've got Derek on the left, Marcelo Lage starting as a left center back, and David Garcia as the right center back. I have Javier Martin Hill starting at right back, and that may be how we are set up to start the season. But I think that competition is going to be fierce with Lucky Opara, and they may it may be one of those things where one player adds something that the other doesn't, and Wiedemann just picks his spots because I know he likes Javier Martin Hill quite a bit, as do most of us that are Spokane supporters. In the double pivot, I have Colin Fernandez as the kind of outright 6 alongside Andre Lewis. And in the 10 slot, of course, Luis Hill. None of that is different from last year. Jack Denton will either he'll be 1 or 1A in that kind of 8 role in the double pivot. And across the midfield tree, I've got I updated this today. I had Masongo Akale there, and I've changed it to Nil Vignoles. So I've got Nil Vignoles starting in if Wiedemann does some version of a 4-2-3-1 or something that approximates that. I've got Vignoles starting on the left with Luis Hill in the 10 role and Siobhan John Brown on the right. And then I've got Nico Brett. But I think to start the season, it'll be Pelaez until Nico is in market, match fit, which may happen by March 16th, our home opener, but I'm not counting on that. So I think Pelaez might actually be the starter to begin the season. Yeah. So my note about Vignoles and why I put him there is after talking to our friend Ayman Zayed, he's just like, there's no way that dude's not going to start too. And I'm like, okay, well then where are we going to put him? Because I also think we have I'm going to call this quote unquote an issue because I'm not clever enough to come up with something softer. But my only issue with what you have projected here is if we have Akale on the left, Siobhan John Brown on the right, despite what you said about Siobhan John Brown's ability in the high press, and we have Vignoles and Lewis in our as our double pivot or our two central midfielders, that's not enough steel. We need a foot and an ass in that midfield. And I think Colin Fernandez is really our only flat out 6. Denton has exceptional ability as like work rate, tracking back for recoveries, etc. But he's also got a couple mistakes in him. And he's still, I think, it was his first year as a pro. I expect him to continue developing because he's a super classy player. But he's somewhere caught between Lewis, our most attacking central midfielder, of that pivot kind of a profile. Fernandez being our most defensive, although I'd like to see Colin Fernandez. I don't know if you've caught my interview with him and Pierre Reedy. He's got such a great touch on those balls that are played in, those lofted balls that are played in behind the line. So I kind of want to see Colin get forward too. In any case, that would be my only concern about seeing Vignals and Lewis in a starting central midfield role, is just the lack of steel when it comes to defensive contributions.
No, I'm completely with you on that. It's hard to project when you've got 4 players that talented that can fit into the central midfield.
It's impossible. Somebody really good is going to be on the bench, John.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're actually wise to point out the Vignals to the wing thing. He was a lot more of a number 8 for Richmond last season, but in prior seasons, that wasn't the case. Like, he was a proper left winger. I am admittedly someone who's very hyper-focused on the most recent thing when I'm trying to pull these together. And this year as many teams. So the more I think about it, the more that seems like it might be this team's best lineup when push comes to shove, is putting him out wide and letting him tuck in,
exactly. He's gonna hug that. He's not gonna hug the touchline, guys. He's not a paint your cleats guy. He's gonna drift into that half space. Whether you start him on the left or you start him in central midfield, I feel like he's gonna drift into that half space on the left where he's really comfortable operating and picking teams apart. So, and then I just imagined Nil tucked in that half space on the left with Derek overlapping, and I was just like, I just got excited thinking about it. So, but maybe that leaves them a little bit defensively frail. So who knows?
I think a thing you've seen a lot in the modern game and increasingly in the USL is kind of the concept of this 3-box-3, where you're keeping 3 defenders back. And Eamon Zayed ran this.
Yeah.
Opara would be the guy who sits back a little bit. So you've got Waldeck as the width on one side. You've got Jean Brown as the width on the other. And then there are 4 players with Vignals tucking in and Heel and Denton and Lewis overloading the central areas. That doesn't feel like it's out of the picture for something this team could roll out and experiment with.
I love it. My one curiosity, and I have this down as we're going to get to the strengths and weaknesses, would just be the role that is Colin Fernandez going to be enough to be in that critical role through the spine when it comes to protecting against a counter and all that kind of thing. Let's talk strengths, weaknesses, and questions about the team. Starting with strengths, and we'll go by these position by position, not player by player, but just position by position, like fullbacks, midfielders, forwards, defenders, midfielders, forwards. Every outfield player ranges from above league average to exceptional for their position. It's kind of remarkable going into the season. I'm not going to name names, but I don't think that's to a player. There's maybe a couple exceptions to that, but the worst player in our hypothetical starting 11 is probably still an above average player in League One. Starting with defenders, tell me what you view as the kind of the strengths of Velocity FC.
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at every defender in this back line. No one here is easy to get by. Every single person who's going to be starting the game for this team is good in one-on-one situations, aware of the communication that they need to bring to the table with their teammates. And I think that injection of new, very Northern Colorado tinged DNA only strengthens that aspect of the team. Like Garcia and Opara have shown time and again in League One that they're up to the challenge. They're heady players. So yeah, that feels like it's a defense that's never going to give up easy chances in a way that I don't know if I'd characterize the 2024 version of the Velocity in the same way.
I agree. It's either an upgrade or it's depth or it's both in the defenders that we've added. And I can't wait to see how like Cameron Miller develops. One thing about Cameron that I have to remind myself of constantly was he was linking up with Waldeck in particular on some set pieces and scoring goals. Like he likes to get involved in the attack. You know, I remember when I interviewed him when he joined the team, I was like, what's your favorite thing? Scoring a goal or getting a clean sheet? And he was like, I can't answer that. So he really likes to get involved in attack. Can't wait to see how he develops. Talk about the midfield.
Yeah. What more can I say about the midfield? You got a set of, specifically in the pivot, 4 players who I would at least call highly above average in a technical sense. Never going to be sloppy giveaways. very progressive across the board. I think if you look at the wingers, there's a real kind of make something out of nothing magic to some of these players. I tend to think of Akale as a player who has that in his back pocket, even if he only showed it in fits and starts.
Oh my God, dude.
We know John Brown can do it from his Fuego tenure. So when you think of that as a group, right, like you've got that tidy back end with the upside, the progressivity, and those wingers that are so dynamic. The Marquis Hernandez who can do that no matter where you're putting him. It feels like a very complete set for a team that wants to control the ball.
Let me pause on Akale for a second. Fans of the podcast will know he joined us after an international friendly with Chivas, their under 23 team, and was so remarkable in that game. We didn't know his name. We're just shouting number 30. Turns out he's the brother of Mukwele Akale, who is an absolute certified killer for New Mexico United. So there is some chops in that family's DNA, and he's a couple years younger than Mukwele. And I just think Masongo is brilliant, and I really want to see how he develops in his, he joined us mid-season under kind of, I think from what I've gathered, a little bit odd circumstances. I don't mean odd in any kind of nefarious way, but like he was probably wondering, is he going to try to play professional soccer and questions like that, but ended up in market and just blew us away in that match against Chivas. And he showed some end product in his very few starts. In that game against Chivas, he whipped in a cross that was just pinpoint accurate. Whether that cross is skimming the grass or it's in the air, he just has a whip of a leg. And he can shoot. He's a good striker of the ball too. So I have high hopes for Akale. And I think that going through a full preseason with Lee Wiedemann and, he's settled in with the team now and all that kind of thing, I'll be very curious to see what happens because we're just spoiled with depth now because Pierre Reedy's back too. And Pierre Reedy was our most dangerous player. He probably generated more threat than anyone else on our team before he got injured. And he was just getting to the end product side of things too. He had a great finish in a Jägermeister Cup game against Central Valley Fuego. So yeah, I think we're spoiled for choice at both the central midfield and the wingers on this team. And then any words about the strikers?
Yeah, just instinctual as a group. And I'm thinking specifically about Brett and Pelaez as two players who know how to read space, know how to read defenders, good enough, certainly, as anchors and hold-up play and can get other players involved when they need to. But it's the finishing. And that's the most important aspect a striker can bring. Can you score goals? Both of these guys have shown that they can.
Wiedemann described it last year when he came on the podcast of the problems that we were having with scoring was just that final 8 to 10 yards. And he's right. It was just that last little burst. And Pelaez started to show that. And it was like, oh, God, this has been missing. Okay. Both of the players, with the two of them now, they both have that in them. Poachers, just nose for goal, going to make that decisive run at the decisive moment. Weaknesses for the team. I have to say it. Yeah. It kind of sticks out. And this is not a picking on thing. Goalkeeper is going to be tenuous. So tell me what your thoughts are so I can make you say it.
Well, we were going in the same place. I was iffy on Mauricio heading into last season, given his championship track record.
Yeah.
Obviously, Brooks Thompson came in, did what was needed.
Was really remarkable.
Elevated this team in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
Can Bilichuk come in and be that guy? Remains to be seen. He's not done it in MLS Next Pro, if we're being dead honest.
Yeah.
He's been fine. Again, we covered it. The context is interesting there. You can't really get a perfect read. But that's the one spot where in a division like League One, where goalkeepers are so often the difference maker,
dude,
this is a position of strength across League One. Spokane doesn't have that. I'm very nervous about it, but I want to be hopeful because Carlos Marancio is a really, really nice human being, just a genuinely classy dude, and I like him a lot. And the question mark I have is, can he recover from the loss of confidence that came from last year and being benched? Goalkeeper is a psychological position, the most in maybe any sport. I don't know if there's a sport where there's more at stake psychologically for the mental fortitude of an athlete than goalkeeper. Books have been written about it. So Bilichuk is a complete unknown. And that role is so important.
I really, really hope it works out, because I think...
You wonder with Mauricio, like heading into the preseason, knowing that you've got now David Garcia, 1 trophies 2 straight years, a real organizer at the back.
Yeah.
What's the confidence like? Like, does it matter to him mentally knowing I've got a legit shield in front of me? I don't have to be the guy. I have to do my job, certainly, but it's not this above and beyond expectation for an expansion team where everyone's getting to know each other. I think that could make a difference.
You know what's funny? This is going by the stupidest of evidence, but I think David Garcia is a very outgoing and vocal kind of a dude.
Yes.
And I'm only saying that because the moment I announced a couple players, and I was in conversation with the USL Spokane. They were very cool about this and telling me, hey, there's a player going to be announced. And they even let me announce a couple of players before they did, which was so flattering and cool.
It's awesome.
Yeah, totally. I was like, what?
It's what every team should be doing.
Don't even get me started. Well, they get it. That's one of the things I really like about the Harnatos is they get it. And immediately after announcing both Lucky and Nil, David Garcia is like, hey, am I going to be announced? I was like, dude, you got to ask the club. I don't know. I really don't know. And he was just like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go to bed, because he was in Spain. And I was just like, okay, this is rare. Players are not usually that outgoing. To me, is some dork with a podcast, right? So maybe once they get to know me, sure. But I'd never met the guy, and he's in Spain and whatever. Played for one of a team we competed with last year. So I hope he's got the type of personality, because I think between Ahmed and Marcelo last year, not really vocal. And Cameron was a rookie. So I hope any deficiencies in terms of communication on that back line, I hope David Garcia is the type that'll go in there and put a foot in an ass, be vocal, talk to his teammates, make sure that stupid mistakes are not tolerated and avoided through good, really proactive, I want loud, proactive communication. And we didn't have that early on. And I would say it was a combination of the personalities of our 2 center backs and our goalkeeper. And all 3 of them have equal share of like what was kind of going wrong early on there. So I don't want to pick on anybody in particular, just Carlos. That wouldn't be fair. Okay. Questions. I'm going to throw out a couple, and then I'll be curious if you have any. Can Lucky play on the right with 3 at the back and then tuck in as a 4th defender when we're out of possession? That's a question I had. Seems like you already said that a moment ago, that yes, he did that with Colorado. He'll do it again for us if he's asked to do that. When Derek is bombing up the wing, Derek is not going to play that role. So you would need it to be Lucky.
We talked to Eamon partway through last season, where he talked about this concept of always having 2 defenders plus 1 back to protect against transition. That could be a fullback, that could be a defensive midfielder, but quite often it was Lucky Opara, no matter where he was playing.
Oh, interesting.
Extra player who was sitting back, had the ability to get forward, but he had this read on the game when he knew the right context. So he's bringing that skill set. He's bringing years of training under Eamon Zayed doing that role to play here in a way that I think bodes well. Interesting.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the other big question for me is the starters in the double pivot, or Lee is a proper Liverpudlian Scouse dude who we can all assume loves the Jurgen Klopp Gegan pressing 4-3-3. Does he ever go with a single pivot? Does he just go, hey, Colin Fernandez is going to be our outright 6, and we're going to let Vinyals and Lewis cook, and maybe like a 4-1-2-1-2 diamond with Vinyals and Lewis on the left and the right, and Luis Heel up in the 10 role? I mean, that's a question I have, is like, how is he going to juggle all these exceptionally gifted central midfielders?
No, yeah, I saw you put that in the outline to kind of open the door for anyone listening, and it kind of put me down the rabbit hole of mapping this team to the Liverpool system. Then,
yeah,
I like the idea of it. I think the wing group, if it's Akale and John Brown in that situation, really built for what you need from players in that setup. Obviously, no way of knowing if Lee's going to go that way, but this team seems built for it.
It does. You're right, though. It doesn't really fit the profile of adding Vinyals. Vinyals wouldn't be in that mix of like the Sadio Mane role or the right. It doesn't quite translate the same.
I think that's the beauty of adding 6 starting level players, is that you've got versatility.
He could do anything. You want. It's so true. We can actually play 2 strikers this year, folks. Because by the way, Siobhan John Brown could play center forward.
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Oh, Marky Hernandez could play a false nine. I mean, I kind of picked that up from the conversation yesterday on the USL show with Eamon. I was like, could Marky Hernandez play kind of a false nine role? I think he could. Okay, that's it for our assessment of where this team stands going into 2025. And that's a perfect segue in talking about the rankings article that you wrote. And I'm going to wrap up our podcast by talking about that. John,
Yes.
You did a power rankings article for USL League One heading into 2025. It's on your website. It's the first thing you'll see at usltactics.com. You should pin that thing because I think it's going to get a lot of reads. I can only imagine what the traffic like is to that page. It's probably quite exceptional.
Very good.
Yeah. Okay. You have Spokane first, Union Omaha, our nemesis, second, and newcomers Westchester SC third. After listening to the USL preview podcast yesterday, I can see why Westchester are fancied. Wow, they've signed some ballers. But just read the article. I don't want to give any more sneak previews of that great information that you provided to this community. Go to usltactics.com to find that article and to make sure that you follow, subscribe to all of John's things. If past is prologue, then John Morrissey's prediction is both flattering, but also quite rational. I mean, we are an expansion team that made a championship final in its first season, which is literally never happened in the history of the USL. And we just added these 7 players that we just talked about, which gives plenty of credence to the idea that Velocity FC are front runners heading into 2025.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you look at the competitive landscape. I kind of think there's a top 5 in this league, but there's a reason I put Spokane at number 1. I trust the talent. I trust the coaching. It feels like even amongst that upper crust, there's a real vision and intention behind what's going on with the Velocity right now, in a way that just recommended them as the top team for the moment, at least.
Your lips, God's ears, John Morrissey. I also highly recommend people check out the League One preview podcast that was recorded on the USL show yesterday with John, his co-host Kaylor Hodges, and Eamon Zayed, the former Northern Colorado head coach, and Alex Ashton, aka League One updater. You and I both expect Velocity FC to be pretty fucking good in 2025. There's so much more that we could discuss, but we just need to see how it will all play out. I can't wait to have you back on the podcast to talk about what's happening in USL's League One this year. That's it for the show. Thank you to my guest, John Morrissey of USL Tactics. You are just invaluable to soccer writ large in the United States. I'm not even going to say lower league soccer because that's bullshit. Just soccer, period. You can follow John on his Substack or Twitter, or just go to his website at usltactics.com to find articles, including the League One preview power rankings that I've described so many times. I also want to thank USL Spokane for providing information throughout this process about the players that they have signed, and former Northern Colorado head coach Eamon Zayed. What a gentleman. What a passionate, badass individual. Buckle up, everyone. 2025 is fully upon us. Thank you all for listening, and thank you once more, John.
Absolutely.